Let's start by doing this. Look at your hands. Really notice them. We take our hands for granted, I think. Our earliest tools, one of our earliest forms of communication. We use them to embrace, to hold, to speak, to say things our words can't. We use them to type, to congratulate, to fight, and we use them to cook. These are my hands. They are not particularly interesting or special. They have, like most people's, weathered some things. I've lost the tips of my fingers on Japanese mandolins while slicing cucumbers. I've cut right into the grain of my index finger using improper slicing techniques. I appreciate my hands, though. They're good hands. When I was growing up, people would ask me the time-honored question usually asked of multiracial kids at some point in their life. So, what are you? And as a child, I used to use my hands to bisect my body. I'm white on this side, and I'm Korean on this side. To a young kid, that's what being multiracial was, separated by fractions. I think of being multiracial now as I look again at my hands. Is one of my hands more white? Is one of them more Korean? This is preposterous, but maybe it almost makes sense. I'm right-handed, I look more Asian. Is my dominant hand Korean? There's a Korean phrase, sonmat. It sort of translates into the taste of your hands. The idea here is that each of our hands holds a taste keyed to us and only us. And when we cook food, our bare hands impart something that is not replicable by anybody else. In Korean, the word for grandmother is 할머니. It sounds close to harmony, though my grandmother and her life was anything but harmonious. I think often about 할머니's sonmat. I never knew to look for it as a kid. I long to know now if it's maybe the missing element that keeps me constantly in search of the flavors of my youth, ever just out of my grasp. My mother, who is white, she has her own sonmat. She loves to cook, and when my 할머니 taught her how to make Korean food, they could only communicate with gestures. Harmony did not speak English. My mom does not speak Korean. Their hands did the talking. A pinch of this, a handful of that. Korean cooking, it's always been women's labor, wrought from their bare hands, smelling of funk and chilies and garlic and ginger. Knowledge that is passed on, but maybe never in a recipe. Only in the muscle memory of what their hands could do, what they mixed, and the taste that it produced. One of my favorite Korean dishes is called 빈대떡. It's a mung bean pancake and one of the oldest recorded foods in Korean cookery. Here it is being made at Gwangjang Market in Seoul. Probably, in my opinion, the best place to get it. When you're there, you can see the mortars grinding down beans into a paste that gets mixed with usually ground pork, kimchi, and maybe puchu, which is a Korean chive. You deep fry it. It's very good. Especially with makgeolli, which is an alcohol. Harmony's 빈대떡 is that elusive bite of food that exists only in my memory, a distant echo on my palate. My mom learned to make 빈대떡 from Harmony, but because they didn't speak the same language, Harmony was easily able to leave steps out, fudge measurements. Sometimes when she'd make it, she'd turn suddenly and toss something into the batter she'd never shown my mom before. Years later, no matter how hard she tried or how often she tried, my mom never could get it right. Harmony was born in Pyongyang, in what is now North Korea, but during her young life was a unified Korea occupied by Japan. Her father, my great-grandfather, was a freedom fighter who operated a church that housed many of the rebels who fought for Korean independence. Toward the end of World War II, the Japanese army arrested my grandfather, Harmony, and the rest of their family and threw them in a prison. Harmony, pregnant with my father, was kicked out. The guards did not want a pregnant woman to die in front of them. However, undaunted, my Harmony walked miles every day from her house to Sondebin prison, where my grandfather was, to deliver by hand salt and rice. Grandfather was sentenced to be executed for refusing to renounce Christianity on August 18th, 1945. The Allies liberated Korea on August 15th. Years later, after the Korean War divided the country, my grandparents fled as so many others did. They nearly died during their escape. Traumas mounting. I think about this trauma, war trauma, immigration trauma, family trauma. My hands, they carry some of that trauma, passed down, handed down, mixed with moments of trauma of my own. My hands, I do not know their flavor. I'm not sure we know the flavor of our own hands, the joys and the sadness that season our food when we touch it, shape it, let it sift through. Last February, I went to visit my Aunt Lily, the oldest living member of my Korean family. My grandparents are long gone. My father died when I was only 13. My journey towards understanding my racial identity still years away. Recently, I lost 2 uncles. So much family history fading away, like recipes never written down and lost to time. For most of my life, the history of my Korean family has been hidden from me, not out of malice, but due to things like language or distance or family feuds. We'd go years without speaking to my uncles or my aunt due to some petty fights that increased after my father died. My mother knew some things about our family, but she has a tendency to exaggerate or alter events as human beings are wont to do. My Korean family did not always treat my mother with kindness, so I knew there were things, much like the pindae-tteok recipe, that were missing, details they refused to give her. After my uncles died, I realized that the only storehouses of knowledge I had left were another uncle who has dementia and Lily. Aunt Lily is just as complex as my grandmother, my harmony, just as fiery. I had no idea if she'd want to see me, if she'd make time for me. I called her daughter, a cousin that I had really loved growing up, and asked if Lily would be up for me coming to Houston, where my aunt lives. Turns out she was not only happy to see me, but was excited somebody was finally asking about our family. And from her, I recorded the history of our family. I also asked for her pindae-tteok recipe. It tastes the closest to harmony's. She added things to it, of course, that I had never seen or known before. She suddenly added a splash of red wine, randomly, why not, into the batter. But the moment that meant the most to me was when she, still incredibly strong at 82 years old, clasped my hand into hers and pushed it down into the batter. I had made pindae-tteok so many times before, and I had always failed. Something was always wrong. But here now, with her, with the stories of my family floating around me, it felt different. The batter in my hands, it felt weightier. As she guided my hands around, I could almost envision Harmony, small in stature, but so large in the shadows she cast over our family, looking over. I remembered she loved to hug me. She loved to cook for me. That batter came together, finally, and as I shaped the pindae-tteok, it felt right in my hands. I fried one, I tasted it. It wasn't Harmony's. Something was missing. I think something will always be missing. But it was good. It was the best I had ever made. It was the best I might ever make. And the taste of my hands, my sonmat, my generations of ancestry, in that moment, maybe I finally understood what they tasted like. I was not missing something specific like an herb or a spice or red wine. No, I had been missing the love and knowledge of my family, my ancestors, my harmony, the taste of their hands, the taste of my hands, now together.